who's going to talk to us about scaling Agile in the enterprise. So, take seats and we'll get started with Dave. Thank you, Dave.
Great. Thank you. I think I've got one of these. Great. So, good morning, everybody. You may be wondering what I had on here last over break. This is a social graph. So I looked at Mylin, which is the Eclipse ALM framework, and I just serialized what people have been doing on Mylin over the last 5 years, and I turned it into a social graph. The reason why I just wanted to illustrate something to you, that there's a lot of different perspectives around software delivery, and one of them is a social perspective. If you looked at your projects, say you took your defect lists or your change management logs and put a social graph on them, you'd find some really, really interesting things. It's incredible who actually works on work and how that aligns to product and how that aligns to organization and how that aligns to your business. So it's just something I'd recommend. It's a relatively easy task and it's incredibly insightful. But that's not what I'm going to be talking to you about. So hopefully you can see that. So hi, so I'm Dave West. Oh, I'll jump up on this. Oh God, that's really neat. So my name's Dave West. My mission in life is to help people deliver software just a little bit better. It used to be to help people deliver software a lot better, and then I met the people. It sort of all went a bit down. I'd like to admit something. It's a really embarrassing admission, and this is a bit like going to AA, isn't it? My name's Dave West, and I was a product manager of something called the Unified Process, or the Rational Unified Process. Boo, hiss, hiss, boo. Yeah, I know. Haven't we learned lots since then, eh? But that was one of my previous jobs. I also was the research director at Forrester Research, running the app dev practice. I got an opportunity to work with lots of organizations. Now I'm Chief Product Officer, cool title, at Tasktop Technologies, the inventors of Mylin and the inventors of Tasktop Sync. So some stuff, if you want to talk to us about that, that's cool. It's about making software flow, helping the world connect software together, as it were. So our mission is to connect the world of software delivery. But I'm not going to be talking much about that. I'm going to be talking about something a little bit interesting because I think we need to talk about it. Software is changing the world. My wife sells tests to doctors, to cancer doctors. And when I was, accidentally forced to accompany her to one of her, events, and I was sitting there as the beautiful husband, obviously, talking very English, because that's what she says, talk English and smile a lot. And so I sort of, apples and pears, my old cool blimey governor, you're a little bit tricky. And they all love that, apparently. So I sort of rolled that out. So I'm available for parties, bar mitzvahs, and other things. Anyway, I was sitting there at dinner, talking to these really, really smart doctors. Now, these people are really smart, though I wonder if they are so smart. They go into school for about 10 years, get massive debt, and then actually don't earn that much. But ignoring that, they're incredibly smart doctors. And I was talking to them about what they did. And I found out that they use loads of software. Did you know that when you're looking for cancer, when you're doing genetic tests, it's a software problem? Which got me very excited. And suddenly then I actually got involved in the conversation, dropped my English ridiculous accent and became animated. Software is changing the world. This is a car. I just bought a new Jeep, fabulous thing. It's got all sorts of bells and whistles on it. It's got over 100 million lines of code, which makes me a little bit nervous, having written a lot of code myself. I realize that every time I back up, I'm taking my life in my hands. But it's going to be almost 300 million lines of code soon, and growing. I happened to be in Las Vegas about 3 weeks ago, and I saw the Google car that drives itself. How cool is that? You know the only accident it's had? When the driver took over. How embarrassing that. Sorry boss, broke your $500 million car. I just reversed it into Dunkin' Donuts. But the point is that software is changing the world. Software is changing the world, but so is how we're consuming that software. Supply chains are taking over. We're moving from these kind of supply chains that are breaking to what I describe as ecosystems. Software isn't just about you building software. It's not just you sitting in a fabulous little dark room, eating pizza, Diet Coke, maybe the odd Red Bull, writing that piece of software. It's you assembling software from multiple destinations and sources. Whether it be an open source project, whether it be the Google Maps API. Have people written to the Google Maps API? But you know there's over 500 defects posted against that API, which is also very embarrassing. If you're driving along and disappear off a cliff, that could be quite embarrassing, couldn't it? Kind of an important API to get right, particularly if you make it part of your GPS system as part of your car. The point is that we're moving to a different world of software delivery. We're moving to a world where we have to think about a much greater chain of people involved. Agile is fantastic. I love it. It's brilliant. It changed my life. I mean, I'll be honest, it's after the Rational Unified process, which also changed my life, but it really did bring me back to thinking about teams, thinking about people working together, thinking about how we can better align to the problem we're trying to solve, and allow us to take control of the process away from these process police that used to come around telling us how to build software when they'd never built a single piece of software themselves in their life. So it changed my world. But unfortunately, we're now moving to a world where Agile isn't enough. Agile is just one component in a much broader sort of landscape of software development. And as you can see, the good thing about ecosystems, unless you're sort of at the bottom of them, but we don't talk about those people, is that you don't control them. You observe them and you behave. And the good thing about Agile, it teaches us how to learn and react and adapt. And that's what Agile is all about. The other thing that's really interesting, and this is sort of Mark Anderson always, Mr. Netscape himself, talked about this, software's eating the world. We've got a problem, ladies and gentlemen. Bit of an embarrassing problem. The workforce is growing, there's obviously jumps when China comes online or when India comes online, and there's this vast array of relatively trained, capable sort of software engineers. They come into the marketplace, therefore the price drops, then over time it starts creeping back up, then another group, maybe Vietnam, comes online, then we consume all of that resource and the price goes up again, and we keep doing this, and unless we teach, unless you find a whole new continent, and being an Englishman, obviously that's my first approach, and put a flag on it, teach them all language and cricket, and make them drink gin, and then we'll be fine. You see, you stop playing cricket, that's your problem. Anyway, so 5 days and it always ends in a draw. Brilliant sport. But the point about it, unless we discover a new subcontinent, which is hiding under Antarctica, full of really good software engineers, this is going to cause us some issues. And you know what that means to us, ladies and gentlemen? It doesn't mean that software is not going to be well anymore. It means we're going to spend all our time maintaining software. Because unfortunately, keeping the lights on is really important. And that means all the cool stuff, all the cool stuff is over here, don't you? Because when push comes to shove, it'll be like, that's great, let's build something boring to keep your bank account working and your mortgage paid, etc., etc. So we're about to hit a problem. That means we have to start thinking of different ways of delivering software. Look at that guy, he's sort of having a look, and I always think these pictures are fantastic. There's a lot of people that are completely ignoring the camera, apart from about 3 guys who obviously are sort of serial killers or something. But anyway, he's like, yes, you can like him, I don't trust him at all. But the point is that we need to have a different way of scaling production. Agile has taught us some things, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that in a moment, about scaling, but it doesn't help us scale production across an enterprise. It doesn't help us scale production across an entire value stream. It helps us scale production inside a team. It helps us deliver software slightly better, probably higher quality, slightly more predictable if we believe some of the stuff that Dave was talking about. It allows us to align and think about things in a more predictable way, and maybe it helps us to deliver a little bit more velocity or productivity, but it doesn't scale inside the enterprise. And people have thought about this before. We've got this, this Mr. Ford, that is Mr. Ford, and obviously one of his earlier cars, it seems to be missing a body, but nobody's noticed yet. The empowered worker and centralized decision making. Hang on a minute, so these things are contradictory, and they are. We're in this really interesting place where to build highly productive, highly capable software delivery teams, we adopt Agile, which to some extent means we lose control. But to be effective as an entity, to apply finite resources to infinite problems, we have to be more smart about the decision making and the management of this practice. So these seem to be contradictory. You know, sort of, it reminds me of the first rad project I did. It was back in the day when I had hair and listened to the New Romantics, you know, that sort of style, until I got into the Smiths and got very depressed. But I used to, and there was this, and I worked in the City of London, or as we call it, the City. You guys don't seem to think of it as that, the City. You seem to have your own, called New York, not sure what that is. Younger, so therefore doesn't count. The City. So I worked in the City and I used to walk every day along London Bridge Station to the City of London. I worked on a trading floor, arbitrage, money traders. I realised they are not that bright, but incredibly arrogant and made loads of money. I was like, what am I doing wrong? But I worked on this floor and I was working with this project manager called John Vermeer. And he was an old school guy, wore a bowler hat, wore a briefcase, sat on the same seat on the same train every day, there and back. You know, he was one of those guys, read the Daily Mail. You know, he was a very, very interesting guy. And he said, tell me about this project you're working, this rad project you're working on. And I said, oh yeah, it's going really well, John. And he said, it's brilliant, we're using DSDMs, and you may have heard of it. It's really exciting, we're engaging with these traders, it's really a lot of fun, we're doing it. When are you going to finish it? Well, it's a rad project, I can't tell you that. You know, we're rapidly assembling and delivering software. He goes, yeah, rapidly. When is the rapid going to be rapid and we're going to finish it? He goes, I said, oh, I can't tell you that, it's rad, John. Anyway, over the next few months, I continuously battered him down until he had a small nervous breakdown and left the company. But the point is that you need to have some level of management control. You need to start thinking about that. And you need to think about how you're marshalling on this. And unfortunately, Agile by its very nature often contradicts that. So there's an interesting problem. We need both these things to be effective, but they are problems. Now, here comes ALM, Application Lifecycle Management. Now, some of you, cynics in the room, of which I probably would one of the guys on the back on Twitter going, #fail continuously. I would be saying, well, ALM was invented by Borland to sell more software. You're right, it was. But actually, I think they may have stumbled on something interesting. What ALM is about is the application of business management to the practice of software delivery. So SDLCs are dead, man. That's just the process part. We need to think of some way of describing the application of business management to the practice of software delivery, right? That's what we need to do. And it talks about tools, enter Borland, stage left. Frank's back, apparently, but that's it. Don't know if you've kept up on that. But anyway, so these tools are coming along and they integrate requirements. But really what it's talking about is integrating the flow, which is realized by tools. Tools are the place you store all this information. Unfortunately, the major tool that you store all this information that manages this flow often is email. You know what E stands for in email? Evil. What it stands for. Email is a really bad, I used to backward, so I introduced Agile in a couple of organizations, one of which I actually banned the use of email on the project. I said, no, we don't want email anymore. Let's try not to use it for an entire sprint and see if that helps. After the initial issues with your mum not being able to send you a shopping list or your wife not being able to moan about you not picking the kids up, ignoring that bit, which was always a problem, we found it actually worked. Why? Because email is a point-to-point type of interaction. So me and this gentleman called Robert, is that right, Robert? Hello, Robert. Robert and I are working on something, and I discover something, so I send him an email. He then includes his mate, Joseph, who looks a very smart gentleman, wearing a tie, so he obviously knows what he's doing. And so Joseph, unless he's working with farm machinery, and then that's very dangerous. But so these guys start working together, and they start sending email, but of course Robert doesn't include me because he's not sure about something. Joseph includes this guy called Mark, who he's never met before, but that's always a good way of building software. And then Mark and Joseph decide to have a conversation. They agree what needs to be done, they solve it. Robert forgets that it all started with me, never includes me, so I go on assuming that something happened and this and that, and thus we get completely disconnected. And you know what that means? It means when flow breaks down, waste increases, great lean term. When collaboration stops, chaos ensues. Email does that to you. Don't use it. But ultimately, we need to think about, if email is a part of your tooling, we need to think about how that fits into this whole flow. We need to think about this whole flow of software delivery. Software predominantly is driven by, Agile is predominantly driven by practitioners. And if you look at it was great that we talked about this earlier, and that Dave said that it would appear that all the people presented there are called Dave, aren't they? I just thought that. Anyway, so it would appear that it's a team-oriented, software development-oriented approach. But that doesn't stop people from trying to roll Agile out to an entire enterprise across multiple teams to people that aren't software engineers. And then saying to them, yeah, I know the words don't make sense, but, I mean, it's like joining, Scientology or something. I mean, sorry, nothing wrong with that. Tom Cruise, nice little chap, good, big nose, apparently. So anyway, but you join, it's like, yeah, I know it doesn't make sense, or, but it does mean it actually helps us deliver software and business and change and stuff. And they go, yeah, I believe that. And also, teams are what it's all about. Agile is all about empowering and enabling teams, right? So it's all about. Organizations are more than teams, unfortunately. Wish they weren't, but they are. They're vast groups of randomly selected people, all going on multiple different agendas, moving towards something at some point that sort of don't really work that well together. But it does allow us some flexibility and allows us to select different approaches. Hang on, that instantly causes some issues. If all these teams are using different approaches, how do they work together? I mean, there's a great Bible story about, the Tower of Babel, we were building this big tower because we wanted to get, into this place called heaven, good, excellent. I'd probably invented a flying machine, but let's build a tower. And we're going up there. And he goes, well, the big man goes, what the hell are you talking about? You can't do that. Let's break up languages so teams go, well, hang on, we do that on purpose. We allow teams to adopt their own practices because it makes them more efficient and more effective. That's cool, that's great, but unfortunately, your tower falls down. You don't quite get to heaven. It's a bit of a disaster. So the point is that, that was a bit religious, wasn't it? Didn't mean that to be. Sorry about that. Anyway, so, whoops. Anyway, so the point is that these different approaches don't help that. So we need to think about something a little bit better. And we talked about TPS. Interesting, The Machine That Changed the World is one of the greatest books I think I've ever read. Is it? Yeah, probably. Yeah, it's pretty. There's a few other books I really like, but this is a really good book. The Machine That Changed the World talks about lean in a way that you don't actually know. It's by James Y. Mack and some other guy, and poor guy, second guy on the author list always falls out, don't they? You sort of always be the first guy on the author list. That's my tip. But the point is that TPS was actually, it invented some stuff around automation, just in time, things like that. But it was in response. It was in response to the constraints that the environment that Toyota found themselves in after the Second World War. It was about responding to the environment, so you can't fire people in Japan. There's a very clear hierarchy. There's things like that. Whereas Ford fired people all the time. People came in, people came out. They had hourly workers. They were building to many different markets, so they had to build flexibility into their process. Ford wasn't doing that. But what was really interesting about what we found in this is it resulted in, and also they had finite resources. Big war just happened, not many people. There we go. Simple as that. Ford, lots of people. America just seems to have lots of people. Very, very successfully, hundreds and hundreds of people. They could throw them at it. So it was because of the environment that they were working in, it meant that they behaved in this way. So we can learn a lot from that because I think there's a lot of parallels. So lean seems to be the answer to this scaling agile issue, to this ultimate sort of problem that we're facing. It provides us with a set of concepts and ideas. It allows us to focus on process at a more generic sort of over level. It allows us to think about information. It allows us to get into a continuous learning or improvement model. And it does focus on value and reduce waste. And by providing us with some nomenclature and some techniques and some great examples in like The Machine That Changed the World and other great work that's been done, it provides us with the techniques that help us talk to the people that don't get agile. So lean helps us do that. Couple that with ALM as the practice that we're leanifying, and you get all of the building blocks necessary for that whole transformation across the enterprise. And there's been lots written about it. Obviously my mate Eric, nice chap, has written a really cool book, The Lean Startup. Recommend you read it. Actually, you should read the books that drove that book. Unfortunately, those books aren't on the Kindle. Aren't on. You can't do ebooks. But anyway, so there's some really good books there. Obviously, all these books. So there's lots and lots and lots of books about it. That can get a little bit overpowering. Therefore, I'm going to concentrate on 4 things, sort of things that you can think about when you think about lean across this whole enterprise, when you think about applying these problems. I'm talking about autonomy. I'm talking about how we can, and what kind of environment we need to put in place to allow people to be autonomous, to create that, the right environment for them to be successful and allow them to focus on value. We're talking about adaptability, what processes make sense. We're talking about transparency. You need to put transparency across the enterprise to make it work. And we're talking about collaboration, how we facilitate and enable collaboration across the enterprise whilst allowing all these teams to use the appropriate tools and techniques that make sense. So let's start and talk about autonomy. Peter Drucker, nice guy, smart guy, all of us did that in their very boring economics and business, not economics, but business management classes. We said, oh God, I'm boring. He's written a lot of books, right? He talks about something really interesting. I'm going to cut to the chase. How do you better enable knowledge workers was one of his sort of missions in life. And what he talks about is that knowledge workers have to manage themselves, they have to have autonomy. So ultimately, Agile is right in that regard. Big Drucker said, and he's incredibly smart. He says that that knowledge workers need to basically be empowered to be autonomous, to be successful, to be productive. And Agile obviously enables us to do that. What's interesting about that is that the knowledge work, software delivery is the ultimate knowledge work. It's probably more the knowledge. So we tend to think about work in terms of heuristic and algorithmic. If you're thinking about algorithmic is, cans of baked beans on the production line, building, whatever that is. In England, it would be something like that, pork pies on the production line. You're sort of making as many pork pies as you possibly can. But heuristic is more of an artistic kind of practice, though surrounded by some sort of engineering discipline, hopefully, because most of software delivery is a combination of heuristic and algorithmic in nature. So we need to think about knowledge workers and how to make them work. The other thing that's really interesting about knowledge workers in software delivery is that innovation is a natural part of their job. Now, I was talking to these doctors sitting around, these oncologists sitting around this table, my wife, and she was trying to sell them some tests, which was really, really cool. And we were talking, and I was talking about, well, there's all these new fabulous drugs coming out, right? And, cancer is, you're battling it, you're going to beat it, it's going to be brilliant. You've got Lance, former cyclist, maybe, possibly, don't know if you believe that or not, but he used to do some cycling, may have won something, we can't talk about it now. You've got Lance Armstrong, and his single-minded, there's a joke in there somewhere, single-minded drive towards solving cancer. You've got all of his stuff. Apparently he doesn't help him with drugs, it's all about education. So you've got all this amazing, and I said, so how do you keep up with all this stuff? And they go, we don't. It takes so long from a drug to come from idea into the innovation is relatively slow, actually. Now you'd be imagine a table with software engineers, getting them there would be tricky, but we've got them there. We promised a Star Trek convention, and we're talking to them, and we say, so hey, what do you build in? Oh, I'm a Ruby guy, mate. Me. Oh yeah, okay, or Scalar, or this, we're using big data. Oh yeah, database of the dead man. Hadoop. Sorry, have you got indigestion? Hadoop. Oh no, sorry, no, obviously not. But yeah, so the speed of innovation in software is incredibly fast. So the only way you're going to manage that, because you can't get these great innovative ideas, put processes around them, build that into you're going to have to allow them to be free to take advantage of this, and you have to let them. Mobiles, we're all building for mobile, right? That's the future. The desktop is dead. So the innovation in mobile is massive. Platform as a service is massive. The point is that we need to think about that. And it used to be expensive innovation. Now it isn't. We talked about MIPS per second and the price of that over time. Amazon, which isn't a particularly cheap vehicle to get your processing power, but it gives you some level of flexibility and cheapness. But ultimately, it's a lot cheaper now. So software is happening. So we think about this thing called dev popularism. I used to tell my developers what tools to use, increasingly telling me. Next thing, they'll be letting them bring their own laptops into work. Perish the thought. Hang on a minute, I was at a large bank yesterday in the city, and they allow their developers to bring in their own laptop, which means they will bring in Macs. The office has changed from black to white in one swoop. And talk about, I think it's funny that Apple's colour is white. Remember the Empire on Star Wars? That was their colour of choice as well, wasn't it? You're going to say any more. Anyway, but the point is that we're starting to see this dev populism which we have to embrace. But that causes us trouble. Because now we have to take the stuff that they're bringing in. They're using Hudson, they're using Jenkins, they're using Cucumber, they're using Puppet and Chef, they're using all this stuff. And we need to bring all that together into a process. Because remember, we said that software developers are working together in teams and across organizations. We need to help them be successful. So we need to think about integration. Integration becomes probably the biggest problem that we have to solve to enable this flow to work. If we start thinking about integration and solving that problem, then we're going to be in a very strong position. So autonomy. Ultimately, to take advantage of the productivity gains, it's a great example of not taking advantage. We want to hire the best engineers in the world. I'm an organization, a bank. So I interview all these amazing engineers. I find these guys, MIT, WPI, doctorate from Stanford, amazing software engineer, writes more code per second than anybody I've ever met. So we get them, we hire them, we pay them ridiculous amounts of money, then we tell them how to work. They're like, well, hang on a minute, I thought you just hired me because I was great. It's like hiring, it's like getting a really good chef, sort of like the Naked Chef or something like that, to come in and say, I really like the way you make gravy, but my grandma said that you should always use salt and dripping, and he said, I don't make gravy like that. Why did you employ me to make gravy like that? Well, because I know best. But you're not a software engineer, it doesn't matter. So we need to accept that we need to hire people and let them be free. I mean, to support them in being free, whilst making sure that we integrate their stuff into an overall strategy, ensure that we have them aligned in the right direction, and then and allow them to help others become really good at their craft. So autonomy is a crucial thing to lean ALM. The other thing is adaptability. Agile has won. Agile is a great practice, a great set of ideas, a great, it's 11 years old now, I guess. And the point about Agile is, was it 12? I don't know, was it 12 years old? I guess it probably is. Years pass very quickly when you get older, don't they? Anyway, it's like my gran now. But the point is that Agile is, become incredibly viable in most organizations. There's not a single organization that I don't go into where they don't talk about Agile and Agile winning. But that leads to a different kind of ALM. It means people now, years ago, my project planning wasn't the province of the team. It was done by John Vermeer in his bowler hat before he had to be carted off in an ambulance. John Vermeer, that's what he does, project management. We don't do that. Hang on. You do planning poker, you talk about burn down, you talk about velocity, you have a daily project planning meeting, really, where you talk about status and all that stuff. So suddenly project planning is part of your agenda. So planning and project management is part of ALM now. It's not done by project management teams in the PMO. We have to think about collaboration. It's not just about traceability, automation, and reporting. We have to think, Agile has made us think, oh, hang on a minute. Agile has made us think about things differently, but the reality of Agile isn't Agile. It's something a term I coined about 3 years ago called water, scrum, fall. Now, don't be offended, I know a lot of you are Agilistas, but in most organizations they're like, yeah, I really want to do Agile. Agile's brilliant, Agile's fantastic. Agile's, it's cool, I've got a t-shirt and everything. And I'm like, yeah, you've got a great t-shirt. But I say, okay, well, let's start doing Agile then, that'd be really cool. But hang on a minute. I need to do some planning up front and define all the requirements, obviously, goes without saying. So I want to spend about 3 months up front doing planning and defining my requirements and understanding stuff. And then, but then I want to do Agile. It's all going to be about Agile. Cross-functional teams, multidisciplinary teams are going to be working together, it's going to be brilliant. But I don't want to release software very frequently. My customer doesn't like me releasing software very frequently. I mean, it's awful for them. I mean, last time we made them be offline for 2 days. We made them back up all their stuff onto Excel spreadsheets. I don't want to do that every week, do that. Or every day, or every 2 weeks if we're doing Agile. So we want to do Agile, but we want to release software infrequently, and we want to spend a great deal of time up front doing planning and everything. Because how else are we going to do Agile? We have to do that. Water, scrum, fall, ladies and gentlemen, is the reality in most organizations. That's okay. Let's accept it. But let's try something. Let's try pushing back this. Let's say we need to do some planning, totally get that. How about we keep that to a small amount of time? Now, Dave talked about spending a dinner and getting everybody for 3 hours. Maybe not that short amount of time. Also, it costs you a lot of dinners, which we obviously don't want to spend lots of money on steak. But maybe it's a little bit longer than that, but try to keep that to the minimum. And then even if you don't release software to production frequently, at least almost release it to production. Get as close as you can Mine Fowler talks about the last mile. Get as close as you possibly can. So maybe not do the whole mile, but do 3/4 of the mile to get it as close as you possibly production. Or maybe start giving it to a small group of people to get some sort of level of sampling. So Water Scrum 4 is the reality. The other thing that's really interesting about Agile, I don't know why I did a build here. You know, you always think when you're on a plane writing slides, you think, oh, build would be really good. Never works. But, you know, so the other thing that's really interesting is batch size. So Agile implies a certain level of batch, you know, a 2-week batch of work. So Waterfall implies a massive batch of work, right? Moves through the system. Start thinking a little bit about batch size. Because maybe, ladies and gentlemen, you know, that 2-week batch is too much for your customers to consume. But maybe there's a 4-week batch or an 8-week batch or 12, you know, start optimizing the size of your batches. Don't think that one batch size fits all, as they say. So start thinking a little bit about that. And then, of course, there's DevOps. Start involving, you know, the continuous delivery, Jez Humble's work. Start rolling that into your process. Start thinking about the flow from development to operations. And start linking these people with these people. And Ops Dev is also pretty important. To start thinking about Ops Dev as much as DevOps. What does that really mean? So you need to think about ALM to include agility. You need to think about batch size more effectively. You need to broaden the life cycle to include more than just development. But you need to accept that Water Scrum 4 is going to be the reality. Therefore, you need to think about how, you know, you're not going to build perfect Agile. So instead, think about how you're going to marry this process up front, this planning process, to minimize it to the smallest it needs to be, considering the amount of risk and unknown on the project, whilst allowing it to happen because you have to. And then deal with the reality of the release process, because that's just what it is. And then understand the compliance environment you work in, there's some rules around process that's important, and then measure for adaptation. So continuously put measures into your process to see what the batch size really is, to see how happy the customer is getting stuff, to think about how you're going to release software frequently, ensure that you're actually spending the right amount of money from a planning point of view. Start managing for adaptation. Transparency. So we've got autonomy. We've allowed these developers to be autonomous. We're building great software. We give them, allow them to pick the tools, but we've glued them together in some way, allowed them to flow in the right way. We're thinking about adaptability. We're thinking about Water Scrum 4. We've got a nice adaptive process in the middle. We've wrapped it appropriately. We've got DevOps thrown in. Now what do we have to do around transparency? We need to think, oh, hang on a minute, there's DevOps Borat. Have you heard of the DevOps Borat? It's a great guy. Whenever you're down, whenever you're sad, it's a bit like the Cheers advert, then don't go into a pub and drink alcohol. Instead, just search for DevOps Borat. So he says, it's a really cool one, company, you know, the wall between Dev and Ops. Instead, we need to use an MBA. That's a great idea. So basically, he's saying that why don't we, instead of just even letting people have a wall, why don't we make it a structural, legal document that stops these people talking? That'll help. But what happens when we don't get these people talking? This is Pat Shanahan from Boeing, and he's working on the 787, and they had a little bit of an issue. They were landing their 787, really cool plane, very expensive, I hear. You can't, you don't get many for a tenner. And he landed it and it didn't stop. That's a bit embarrassing, isn't it? Particularly if you're standing on the end of the runway selling hot dogs. What the heck's that doing? Oh my God, there's a plane coming. And it crashed. And he said, actually the reason wasn't that the brakes didn't work, but traceability of the software was at fault. So ultimately, the people that were building and testing one component of the system and people that were building and testing another component of the system were not collaborating effectively. Oops-a-daisy. So it meant that they didn't work very well together. So, we need to think about automating the relationship between these things. So I know the Agilistas in there are like, no, tools are bad. Tools are awful. We need just a whiteboard. Funny story about a whiteboard. I had a fabulous whiteboard, had all my stories on it. I was working late in the office, had to go for a bit of a sit-down think in the loo. Disappeared off for the appropriate manly time, 3 or 4 hours. And when I came back, nobody else was in the office apart from the cleaner. The cleaner, I noticed, was hoovering below my fabulously long whiteboard with all my stories, picking them up from the floor and putting them back on in a different place. I said, hang on a minute, love. And we managed to find a language. Apparently she didn't speak English. And my Spanish, Portuguese, or Bulgarian was a little bit off at that moment, not 100% certain. But we came to an understanding that she'd been doing it for weeks. And I wondered why a couple of these stories I thought were done weren't done, and vice versa. Damn it. Tools actually do add some value, ladies and gentlemen. They add the value when you've got a team that's in multiple locations. They give you the ability to maybe surface information that you couldn't surface before. They allow you to capture things that you wouldn't normally capture. You need to automate the connection between these stovepipes. You need to get these different tools that everybody's working to work together in a seamless and integrated way. That's the reality. Immaterial that Tastop does that, but the point is that the reality is that, and you need to start thinking about that. Because then when you do that, you can start visualizing some of this. You can start visualizing the flow of work through these processes and practices. You can start visualizing how work moves during the life cycle. You can start understanding where work's getting bottlenecks. You can start applying some lean principles, such as reducing work in progress, reducing the WIP limits, increasing the flow, looking at bottlenecks, invisible queues, all that cool stuff that Kanban and other techniques provide for you. But you can't do that if your Kanban board is just your development and your test guide, or your development and actually just that. So you need to think about that. Oh, hang on a minute. In DevOps, we communicate with coworker only by a Jira ticket. Well, that's the reality, unfortunately, that we find. And then that means nobody knows what the hell's going on, because Jira, lovely tool, Atlassian, fantastic company, amazing market capitalization potential. But we've got this issue. You've got to get this thing surfaced and visualized. So which means you need to put in place a visual and transparent process. You need to continuously search for the truth. You need to manage in real time. Spreadsheets don't cut it. So evil email? We don't like that, do we? That's evil. And then we've got spreadsheets, sinful spreadsheets over here. Because it takes ages, you create these amazing spreadsheets, they're always out of date, they're never really right, they send them around the process, everybody's arguing about them, you never get any real work done. But you don't have a guy with a clipboard walking, actually that's not true. If you're in an emerging technology economy, dare I say India, China, Vietnam, etc., Brazil, you might be able to do this. You might be able to have a guy walking around with a clipboard doing this stuff. And building the data in real time using a manual process. Unfortunately though, in America where resources are expensive, this becomes an awfully large burden. Think about automation. Don't seem like the Gestapo with your tests and your training and your data. Six Sigma's great, but don't be a Six Sigma religious nut who walks all around going, oh well, yeah, your delta's off there, and you're like, what does that really mean? I don't know. And don't talk in code. So when you have these great diagrams, like burn down's a great example. I was in a meeting with some business guys and said, oh, the burn down's looking like our velocity is slipping, and that guy said, right, marvellous, lovely diagram. Does that mean we're going to be late? Well, yeah. Why don't you just say that? Oh, well, because we're talking about a burn down here. And the last one is collaboration. I don't know if you've seen this diagram. Best analogy I find to describe the concept of a Scrum Master is a tooth fairy. That's good old DevOps Borat. Look at this. This is the relationship between people in most organizations. So project managers, think of developers as the sort of production line. We've got project managers think of themselves as we will change the world. Most important job. Project managers are seen by developers as lazy gits. Developers think of themselves as rocket scientists. Designers, I have no idea how they think of themselves, but I didn't realize I was a designer, but I think I might be. And I look really good in Victoria's Secrets. And then obviously designers, project managers think they're idiots, and then developers are obviously, that's my cousin Adrian, and he doesn't get out much, lives in the spare room at my house. Anyway, so that really is. No, so you've got this cultural gap you need to sort out. And software delivery is all about teams working together to deliver software. High performance teams is crucial, so you need to think about how you do that. So you need to synchronize all of this stuff. We've learned a lot from Mylin. Mylin is an open source framework for Eclipse that helps developers get a real good understanding of the work that they're trying to do. Workflow, activity, context, it provides all of that in Eclipse or in Visual Studio. That's something we've been doing for years. And we've learned that when you start surfacing information natively in the tools or the domain and the context of the people are working, it starts getting used. these Twitter streams or work streams are a great way of getting activity instead of email. Some other things around collaboration are key. You've got to do it. You need to build a currency to facilitate and enable collaboration in your organization. Think about what the currency is. When I say defect and you say defect, do you really mean that? Is issue and defect the same? Get that nomenclature, get that taxonomy. Accept that disconnects between roles. Yes, there's going to be that, so help them to deal with that. No one uses additional collaboration tools. We're using Yammer in our own organization, and the thing I've learned is that people like certain restaurants, they go out on the weekend, and I know what everybody does in terms of sport now, which is brilliant, but isn't really helping me on my day-to-day job, and of course it takes time. So what does all this mean? I don't know. I really don't. It seems to be a very interesting set of ideas. A couple of jokes, that's always good. But what does it all mean? Well, let's try to decipher this. So ultimately, there's a looming economic crisis. That sounds very cool, very fancy. The UN's in session. I should be there. We do. The ability to build software is linked to our ability as an economy to generate wealth and actually get better. So we have a moral responsibility to do this. So you're not just sitting there trying to make your lives better and cooler and help you make the boss happier with you. You're doing this to change the world. Isn't that kind of cool? So that means at parties, when somebody says, what do you do? Don't say, I'm a software professional or a software engineer or a developer. Say, I'm changing the world. Because you are. Because if we can build 10 lines of code better more than we did last year, or 1 million lines of code better than we did last year, that means all those great ideas that can be created because of that. And unfortunately, corporate innovation will start to slow down unless we start thinking about how we improve that. Dave Thomas talked about some of these really interesting ideas to how to do that, but ultimately we're all responsible for doing that. Development price is going to increase. That's good for us, but not necessarily good for the economy, and technical debt will increase. So ultimately, we need to start, because we're going to be putting off stuff to fixing stuff, because that's going to be a problem. So we've got this problem, and this is how we currently build software. Now, as great as Detroit is, in the 70s and 80s, or in the 80s, wasn't the best place to be in the world, was it? We do not want to be there in software delivery. So let's start learning about Lean and start thinking about how applying Lean to this overall manufacturing process of software delivery. Because we need to think about managing the whole flow. Now, what we do in Agile, we do really well, is that we might do this very well, but we don't do this very well, or we do this very well, and we don't do this. Think about the whole flow. And automation is not a bad thing. Think about how you're going to automate these practices. Think about how you're going to automate this flow. It makes sense. So, what's my tattoo that you would write if you were going to write a tattoo with what you learned from this talk, which would be really silly. But if you were, these are the things that you should think about. Sometimes I wonder about myself. Anyway, my mum says, sometimes, David, your mouth goes on. I'm not sure where your brain is. I was like, no, neither am I. So practices, take ownership of your destiny. So empower, take control of the stuff. Get the tools that work for you to make you successful. Adopt the practices that make sense. If TDD is right for you, use it. Don't be shy. But just think about how to fit that into increasing transparency for your managers, ensuring that you've got some level of visibility and connects into a broader process. So don't do it on its own, do it as part of something more. Managers, embrace self-organization. Obviously, you have to be in a different track now, but ignore that. And autonomy. Accept that there's going to be this broader ALM vision and connect into it. Think about this end-to-end flow as you're approaching your job. And then if you're a tool vendor, so some people that aren't in this room, but maybe there are, or ThoughtWorks is in this room, they're a tool vendor, and embrace complex software ecosystems. Don't just think about software in the small, think about it in the large. Build tools to help people manage software in the large. If you don't, you're going to be in trouble. We've got to start thinking about that. And then glue them together with some sort of idea of social tasks or some sort of standard currency. Help that all fit together. Cool. That was a roller coaster ride. Hour-long presentation, 45 minutes, always fun. So hopefully that was a little bit interesting. Hopefully you've thought a little bit more about how applying Lean can work, thinking about Lean ALM, thinking about some of the principles about reducing value. Oh no, increasing value, reducing waste, as opposed to my approach, which would have been the opposite. If you've got any other comments or questions, feel free to tweet me. That's always fun. We like that, don't we? Isn't it interesting? You used to have a corporate email account and you'd send things to your email. I don't give people, I do give people my corporate email account, but I'm kind of like, just tweet me, man, because I own this relationship, not my boss. I happen to be the boss, but it's a bit confusing. But so it's kind of funny how that changes. But anyway, so think about that. Think about some of our stuff, and hopefully this has been fun. And you can come and chat to me today. There's going to be a panel later. That should be a bit of fun, a bit of confrontation, always enjoyable, particularly between me and Dave. So it should be a laugh. And if you've got any questions, feel free to grab me during the day, and that's it. Thank you very much.
Dave, so I know I can hear Peter Bell, so come to other rooms. Thanks again.